Today's topic is all about digital accessibility maturity and, as I say, the scorecard that's been available on our site for a while. We're going to look through a number of different aspects of that. What is accessibility maturity? Why is it so important? What do different types of organizations need to do to get good at accessibility? We've got some things about the assessment itself, some things about how what comes out of the scorecard can help you understand what's important where you're at, some of the elements of the scorecard, and then there will be time at the end for me to try and pull out of my experience a good case study based on what aspects of the scorecard are most interesting to everyone on the call. So presenting today, I say I'm Jonathan Hassell, if you haven't met me yet, and I've got Pete Bricknell as well, who's been working on the scorecard with me and the whole of our ISO 30071 Part 1 Ready program that we're doing with a number of people. I think it's important to get going. We want to catch up a little bit of time. So here we are. What is digital accessibility maturity and why is it so important? Well, this is something that happened earlier this year. A couple of months ago, various accessibility advocates all around the world were saying that accessibility was rushing forwards because the EU and the UK had adopted EN 301-549. These were the new regulations to try and get public sector bodies to make everything they do accessible. So is this a great year for accessibility? Well, not perfectly, if I'm honest. So around about the same time, this article came out from a very good friend of mine, Gus Alexiou, in Forbes, sharing some research that Scope had done, that 9 out of 10 local authority websites that they'd looked at were still inaccessible, that they had a number of accessibility errors. And, the question was, well, is it time to start naming and shaming websites because they obviously are getting this wrong and, something needs to be done? Well, one of the things, or at least two of the things that were suggested in the article are these. So one was more government monitoring. So this is what the government is doing between now and the 22nd of December next year, is that they're going to do over 1,000 simplified tests. Those are automated tests, 80 detailed audits, 25 mobile application audits. Basically, if you're in public sector, the government may be auditing your site without you knowing it, potentially. Well, that might kind of kick people into the right sort of headspace, possibly. Another thing suggested was this is silk tie, but it could be any of the large automated accessibility test tools where you can just point them at a bunch of websites and it will tell you something about the accessibility of those sites. Literally, this is online all of the time and effectively is already naming and shaming various different UK government websites. The thing is with this, I don't think it's massively helpful because fundamentally this doesn't test the accessibility of the site. It tests the accessibility of about 30% of the checkpoints that the site could be looking at. So actually things that are doing well in here may be doing badly on the other part of WCAG and vice versa. The other thing about all of these ways of, if you like, addressing that imperative to try and help organizations take accessibility more seriously is that if we compare them to other similar things in other areas, I think we can see what's going on. I want to compare this to measuring safety on roads. So as something else which is really, really important, but not everybody does. So what we have here is the speed cameras that check your speed. Well, that's the equivalent of those spot checks that the government is doing. An MOT, so that's checking whether or not the car that you would be driving on those roads in is roadworthy. Okay, that's useful and that happens annually. But also fundamentally, the really important thing here is that the person driving the car, the person who has most impact on safety on roads, is not allowed on that road until they pass the driving test. So there's an underlying competence check. If we compare that, for example, to safety for digital creators on digital highways, if we think about accessibility as being a safety and quality measure, then those random samples are certainly going to be there from the government for public sector sites. But there's nothing like, if you like, that yearly check. For us, that would be, your CMS, your content management system, your JavaScript library might have been great last year, but actually technology moves on. So we want to make sure that websites move on with it. And as they do that, keep accessibility. You won't find that there in anything the government is pushing out at the moment. And the other thing is those accessibility skills. So the people who created those websites, they don't have to pass a test to be able to put a website live. If they did, probably accessibility will be working a lot better. So really, we've got a lot of things missing, and that's the key thing here, because what tends to be happening at the moment and what people are kind of fixated on is measuring results, how accessible websites are, rather than measuring how and why those results are happening. What we would suggest is that, the current results when it comes to PS bar look a little bit like this, unfortunately. So it is a real car crash. There are huge number of people who do not want to be named and shamed. They don't want anyone looking at them because they've not been able to uphold their end of the bargain. And naming and shaming them and saying, look, there's a big car crash out there doesn't really help. From my perspective, you want to know why these results are happening. And in this case, if you've seen the Blues Brothers recently, you'll know that that's where that still is from. So it's actually, there is, if you like, a couple of crazy maniacs on the road who are causing all of this fuss. And in some ways, I think certainly when it comes to the public sector this year, COVID, I think, is that crazy maniac. There are good reasons probably why organizations haven't been getting these things right. The thing we want to know is, what are those reasons and how do we help? And that's where we're about today. So this is a session about saying, okay, it's entirely possible that everybody's had really good, well-meaning thoughts about accessibility. They wanted to get things there, but they just weren't good at it. They couldn't get to the right point in this kind of diagram quickly enough. So maybe they were aware that there was a standard, they was aware of some guidelines, some requirements. Maybe they'd had an audit done, but they certainly, in a lot of cases, didn't get beyond that. So they didn't get to competence. They weren't able to know how to change their website, how to fix it. They certainly didn't get to compliance. That's what you can see out there, let alone the sort of things that we are advocating when it comes to accessibility, which is all about the advantage that can come when you actually are good at this. So that's what we're about today. We're about looking at how people are going on this journey, and we wanted to give you a Slido. So I don't know if you've got a mobile phone with you, but the best way of participating is to get your mobile phone out, switch it to camera or a QR reader, and scan the QR code that's on the screen here. If you can't see the QR code on the screen, if you go to slido.com, and this particular poll is poll 12456. And this is all about how mature your accessibility in your organization is at the moment. Are you early days where you've not really done anything? Are you just getting going? Have you had your site checked out, like a lot of people, for PS bar, but not really fixed it yet? Have you actually checked your site out and fixed it? And you're thinking, well, is there anything else? What else is there to this accessibility thing? Maybe you've actually started getting good at this. It's there in your product development. It's now business as usual. It could be, especially as an agency, for example, or an internal team, that people know you can be trusted to get accessibility right. Or it could be that you're a category leader. And for you, it's all about, if you like, innovation. So if you can just tell us which one of those you're at. And so what I'm seeing from folks so far is that 58% are just getting going, up to 20% got the site checked out, not really fixed it yet. 13% have got to actually full business as usual, which is great. Some, nothing yet, will get around to it. Some have got the site checked and fixed, but in general, people still feel like they're quite early on in their journey. Effectively, what we've got on the screen there shows that, people have got a long way to go, which is absolutely fine. We need to help people where they're at. Thank you. That's good. I'm gonna move back onto the PowerPoint. So if that's where you're at, then how do we help you get going or help you improve in maturity wherever you are? The great thing about what we're talking about today is even organizations who are absolutely brilliant have got things to learn today. The key thing really is that we've got people on the call from different types of organization. So, and the key thing really is if you're thinking about, okay, what should the next thing be for us? Then it will be different from your organization, from maybe the organizations of the other people on the call. If you like, there's a lot of diversity in organizations, and that diversity plays out when it comes to what good at accessibility actually looks like for you. So I'm going to give you a few examples. So say, for example, we're going to take where we started, which was those local councils. What does good at accessibility look like for them? Well, I would suggest that this thing on the left here is exactly why most of those 9 websites were not as accessible as they could have been. The 9 out of 10 weren't accessible. We've been working with quite a number of public sector organizations this year, and they all say, well, we didn't make the website. So actually they are going back to people who made a website for them, often quite a while ago, and saying, you know, that thing you created for us, yeah, we probably should have asked you to make it accessible, shouldn't we? They didn't get their procurement right. And so now they're finding out that they've got problems. That's what they need to do going forwards, is to make sure whoever is making the site is able to do it in an accessible way. The part of it that actually they can control a lot more easily is the maintenance. So that's the thing that they'll be doing, maintaining the site, making sure that the content on it is updated. So actually training their staff to keep the site up to date with content accessibility is massively important. But chances are they only did any training in development and all of those sorts of things, because they're not the people doing it a lot of the time. If we contrast that, for example, to the type of digital agency who might have been creating the site for them, what do they need to do to get good at accessibility? Well, they do make the site, so they need to be really skilled at accessibility and fundamentally how to do that well within a digital team. They don't maintain it though, so actually, whatever the mechanism that they've put into that site, whether it's a content management system or whatever, they need to put in there all of the capability in the content management system and any kind of hints and tips for the people maintaining it in the client to keep things accessible. But they're not going to get the work unless they can prove, certainly when it comes to those councils these days, that they can actually create an accessible website. So digital agencies these days need to prove that they're good at this. The other thing is, it's not just good enough to be good enough at this. You need to make sure you're really efficient, because if you can't do this efficiently, if you are thousands of pounds more expensive than an organization that maybe does websites but doesn't know anything about accessibility at all, it's entirely possible that you can know everything about accessibility and yet still lose the contract because you're too expensive. So you need to be able to deliver this stuff and deliver this stuff in an efficient way. Online tools, services vendors, again, they're creating the tools, but they need to make sure that customers can actually buy it. So for example, we're doing huge amounts of VPATs for organizations at the moment, for them to prove to organizations that they've thought about accessibility when they were creating a tool. They need to keep it accessible, or else the organizations may say, well, hold on a second, it used to be great, but now the accessibility has fallen off. We're not going to have your tool. The next time we can change to someone else's, we will. So what they want to do is to be able to prove to all of their clients that they can be trusted to always get this right. Not just once, the first time they create a tool, but all of the time. That's what we find that organizations need. And then just a final point here. So yeah, most organizations may have people with disabilities actually working for them. And oftentimes they forget those internal staff with disabilities don't just need the reasonable adjustments, i.e. giving them a screen reader or something like that, but they also need to make sure that those tools that they might be buying from the software as a service vendor are actually accessible. So if they haven't got that right, they're in problems. They do maintain them, so they need to make sure that, for example, everybody creating stuff for an intranet is all working. And they need to make sure that training and support for all of their teams is accessible as well. So it just gives you an idea of the differences between the different types of organizations out there who might want accessibility as part of their best practice. What they all have in common is one standard, which is ISO 30071 Part 1. This is the standard that we created to try and enable all of these organizations to see whether or not they're creating things or procuring things, whether or not they're thinking about customers or they're thinking about clients or they're thinking about staff, that actually one standard can help them get all the way there. And I'm going to hand over to Pete now for him to take you through, if you like, 4 reasons for doing a scorecard assessment. So Pete, over to you.
Sure. So what I'm going to cover, I'm just checking. There we go. We've got some captions come on. What I'm going to cover is why you'd want to do an assessment, a scorecard assessment. Then I'll show you what it looks for real. And we'll then talk a little bit about the building blocks in it and what they can do for you. So the first thing is that it's very easy to go and do an audit. An audit just says what you've been like before, but it doesn't say all the other things that need to be in place. And so we want to give a solution, not a sticking plaster, or you want to have a look at how you want accessibility embedded in the business and the organization. And so we've got 9 building blocks of that, and they're based off the ISO 30071-1 standard. And they look beyond the audit about embedding it in the organization. So thinking about a solution and not a sticking plaster. The second thing is you want to create a movement. You want to be beyond one lone voice calling out saying we need to think about accessibility. And using a scorecard gives you an ability, one, for you to think how you're doing, but also get other people in the organization to do the same thing with the scorecard. And suddenly they realize, actually, we need to work at this. So it helps you create a movement. And if you haven't seen it before, there's a lovely YouTube video about how to start a movement. I'll make sure before the end of the call that link is in the chat. So we want to create that motivation to actually change. We want to help think about spreading responsibility so that people are empowered to do it. There's no point in being the accessibility person and you've got no budget. But also, where do you get support from? How do you get support, both internally and externally? None of us are experts at everything. And then how do you make this a non-negotiable element of governance? That this is just stuff that gets done. You know, we think about security with websites, and we now think about every website needs to work on mobile. Those are now non-negotiable. It's not a choice. It's got to happen. And we'd love to see accessibility as one of those things. And then how do we make sure that we're making the effort to show the ROI? It's very easy for organizations to say, well, we're not going to do anything until you've shown the ROI, but we're not going to put any money into finding the return on investment either. So a scorecard can help you think about building that momentum. It also helps you think about what to focus on. There's some things you may well be good at, and there's some things that you may have a gap at, and there's some things you didn't even know that you need to begin considering. So that's why we have those 9 areas, and it helps you to think about one step towards getting a fuller business case of what you want to do. A scorecard, which is a self-assessment, a thing that you do in 15 minutes, is not the same as doing a detailed assessment. However, it gets you that stepping stone to move you forward. So a fuller assessment beyond the quick self-assessment would be, let's get some input across the business. Let's get somebody to look at your tools, your sites, your policies and documentations from an external perspective. And let's look at us compared to other organizations in the space we play to see where we fit. And the last part is the Grand Canyon wasn't built in a day. There's never enough money to do everything at once. So what do you want to do? You want to need to think about 2 things that happen in parallel: doing the right things so you can demonstrate some quick wins, and doing things right so that it goes from audit to embed to just this happens all the time. And this can help give you the ammunition to look at the biggest gaps and say, this is what we need to focus on. So if you're looking for budget for next year, we need to focus on these 3 areas. And that's really what the scorecard can do for you. So I'm going to talk a little bit about what's in the scorecard. And while I talk about that, please do put questions in the chat so we can then listen and respond to your questions. So let me just bring across to the website. What will be interesting to know is on your screen, there should be a little button at the bottom bar which says reaction. What would be really interesting to know is if you've done the scorecard, just put some kind of little thumbs up, a wave, a smile, or whatever it is using that reaction, just so we can see who's actually had a go at it so far. Great, that's 1, 2, 3, 4, great, maybe 5, 6 of you. Thank you for that. That's great. This talk is for people who've both done it and those who are thinking about doing it. So how do you find where this self-assessment scorecard is? So on the Hassell Inclusion website, scroll down and there's go to the scorecard. This will give you access to a video where Jonathan, with the same background, will tell you a little bit more about how to fill it in. And this link will take you to the scorecard itself. Our recommendation is give yourself about 20 minutes to complete this. And if you're in the technical space, you might want to do this with somebody who is the diversity and inclusion lead within your organization, and you sit down together to do it. And if you're not in a technical space, grab somebody from the product development team and let's do this together. And it'll be interesting just to hear from each other as you think about the questions. I'm not going to do all 20 questions in here, but I'm just going to kick off to illustrate what this looks like. So you can see I'm just randomly giving some data here. Great. So there's 70 questions, and they'll be asking you a whole variety of issues about motivation, about software development. What we've had as feedback from other people is, if I'm not sure, what shall I put in here? So if you take something like, how much awareness and buy-in for digital accessibility do you have from your CEO or finance director? It's like, I have no idea. Then you might say, well, actually, I'll start with unaware because that's my starting point. If you know that they've had a presentation from the top, or the organization is committed to something like Valuable 500 or other external bodies about accessibility, you might say, well, actually, I'm sure they're committed. And so we have a variety of questions like that. And I'm just going to randomly respond to this section because I just want to take us to the next section before I look at the result of this. So it's going to ask you about your quite a few questions. Then you have some other types of questions, which is, for example, are your product managers aware of their responsibility for delivering accessibility? If you're not sure, I would just start with a no, and you can clarify later on. If you think, well, yes, people are doing it because they believe in it in themselves, then put a yes. If it's, well, I know we have an accessibility strategy and this is just part of their job, you've got choices of your different levels. So this is basically the scorecard. As I say, there's about 70 questions across 9 areas. And because this is aimed to give you something helpful and useful, it will take you some time. It is worth investing that 20 minutes or so to do the scorecard. It's not kind of like the back end of a Cosmopolitan magazine, ask 10 questions to see what your personality type is. This is aimed to give you something more helpful and more useful. Because what you get at the end of this is, when you finished it, we will automatically email your results and number crunch the results to say, based on your answers to your questions, where might you be as an overall score against awareness? Let's just go and show that's a little bit more deeply. So how aware is your business? How competent is it? How compliant, and that advantage level? And in the report, you'll get, it's gone really small, right? Apologies. You'll get summary score. So for each of those 9 areas, where do we think, based on your scores, you are out of 100%? And that could give you the chance to say, oh, if I take this random result, we've got 23% on responsibility and 64% on motivation. So this organization is desperate to get going, but it may be you haven't got somebody who's assigned or got budget to do anything. That might tell you what we need to do about it. And then in the report, you get a detail for each of those areas. So where you are in compliance. And what we've done is given you a tick list of things that you could do about it for each of those areas. And we've given that tick list kind of managed according to your level, but you may have different ideas that you need to do about motivation. So it gives you something practical to say, okay, I've got the scorecard, now what do I do with it? So hopefully that gives you an idea of the scorecard. So let's just have a look at some of the questions. So Rob's asked, how could the scorecard allow for trending over time? The scorecard is free. You can do it anytime, as often as you want. So you could do one now, you could do one again in 6 months' time and see how it's changed based on your perspective. You could get a couple of people in the organization to do the scorecard and then come back together and say, have we got some differences of views? So that's a useful way of doing the scorecard. Any other questions?
I've got a couple of questions that came in before the session. So Becky was asking, how do you calculate maturity and compare it? So yeah, really interesting question there. So obviously how you calculate maturity, well, there are lots of scores in here. How we do it is no massive secret really. It's all of the elements together weighted for each one's importance to maturity. How do we compare it with other organizations is a really interesting one. Because obviously you all have, if you fill in the scorecard, will be able to get the results for yourselves, but you won't be able to see it for anybody else. And that's exactly the way it should be, because that's private information, which is really important to you. But if you want to know how good another organization is to compare yourself against. If a couple of months back you were on our webinar about workplace inclusion, you would have seen Rob from our team talking about some benchmarking that we'd done for one of our clients on that specific thing. They wanted to know, how their competitors are. And you can only do that with information which is available publicly. So we have a mechanism for doing that. It's a very fair mechanism that we've benchmarked quite a number of organizations and areas with. So it just gives you an idea of some of those things. Did anybody else have any sort of questions about how to get the best from the survey? Anyone get stuck or anything like that? To say, I haven't seen any questions come through on that sort of thing, but we'd be very happy to answer them. No? Okay, well, we started a little late. So Pete, I think let's move on to the next part. Thank you.
If a question pops up in your mind, just write it down on the screen and we'll find a moment to answer it. So there's 9 areas that we look at, and these are drawn from the ISO standard, put in a way that's kind of quite simple and clear to use. The report will give you some detail on each one of those 9 areas. So what I want to just do on this call is talk about why we got them and in broad terms what they do for you. So the first 3 are around being prepared. If you've got motivation, then you've got a chance to bring the organization forward. If the motivation is low, then you might need to be talking about the benefits. You might need to be talking to HR and seeing about next year's personal team goals include some accessibility in it. Or it might be encouraging leadership to sign up to something that gives you visible commitment. So because you've told the world that diversity, inclusion and accessibility is important, then that gives the remit to do something about it. One organization, a large accounting firm that we've been working with and talking to, because it's on their headline as this is what the organization is doing, it gives different departments the ability to say, well, if this is what we tell the world, when we talk about internal tools, we need to make sure they're accessible. Or when we talk about external tools, we need to make sure our customers understand we're building them with accessibility in mind. The second one is responsibility. It's great to have a statement, but who's actually going to do it? Who at the board level is responsible for this? And how they're going to get budget? And how are they delegating responsibility through the organization? So it hits down to the technical people, hits down to procurement, it hits down to HR. And if those things are not in place, you might be scrambling as a lone voice in the wilderness. And the third part is looking at capability. Are your teams trained, competent, capable of delivering this? And so if that is low at the moment, then you might think about what training programs I need to put my team in. Should I do a much more detailed role-based accessibility capability assessment? And that might be the first step. Once we got everyone talking the same language, both on the technical side and non-technical side, it will be easier for us to do the next thing, which is doing the right things. So have you got the support around you? So one of the things we're proud of at Hassell Inclusion is our goal is to train an organization so they can do it themselves. When you look at external support, are you comfortable that you've got good expertise around you? Are you comfortable that they don't want you to be dependent on them, that they're going to do you something all the time, but you can't get rid of them? And also deciding what we want to build up our own skills in-house versus outside. Next thing, which is quite important, is policies and practice. Is this embedded in the way you think about procurement? Is this in the way you think about selecting technology, around how you get agencies to build for you? We found with one particular organization, they hadn't asked in procurement about accessibility, and then there was a real problem with their provider because the provider, well, you didn't ask for it, we didn't give it to you. And yet the organization is responsible for meeting some external standards. And the last part is about governance. Thinking about the life cycle, thinking about the right questions, thinking about sign off, where decisions get made. Are you considering accessibility in that? So the third area is around doing things right. Is accessibility in your product development process at the right point, right early on? And if you think about innovation recently, if you think about things like Google Home, Amazon Alexa, they could have been for people with partial sight or no sight, and yet they serve everybody. If you think about captions on Netflix, it serves everybody. When the tube system was running in London, I would watch movies on the tube and the captions were great. So have we got this early in the development process? Are we thinking about people with disabilities, both temporary and permanent, right early on as we do the design? Are we actually measuring ROI? Not saying we ought to find the benefits, but is money and time being put into what measures are important? How do you monitor them and how do you report them back so you can tell people of your success? And the last one is innovation. So that Alexa example, the captions example, we were talking on a webinar last week with somebody with partial sight, where he would get a system which would read the Google map, notice things that are near him in real time, and place them in audio around his head. That is going to be something that would be quite amazing for everybody when that technology is mainstream. So are you thinking accessibility and innovation? Because it could be the driver that drives some amazing stuff, not the thing you need to bolt on at the end. So those are what are the 9 areas. If you find yourself low in any of those areas, it gives you the chance to focus and either look for funding, look for allies, or look for focus in the coming year. So I'm going to pass back to Jonathan.
Thanks, Pete. So hopefully you can all see that. That's good. So yeah, your turn again. So there were 9 building blocks there. We'd really like you to let us know which 2 of those are the most important for you at the moment. And then what I'm going to try and do is to pull out of my head in the next section some case studies that illustrate the things that you want us to talk about most. So yeah, cameras out again, slido.com 12455, or use the QR code. Is it that lack of motivation, lack of buy-in from the top? Is it, as 2 people have said already, capability? How do we make sure that everything is kind of working well there? Let us know in there what is the most important thing for you, and I'll just start bringing up the scores. Okay, so certainly capability, getting the team skilled up seems to be a big one at the top there. A motivation, lack of management buy-in to do it, policies, responsibility, everything's moving around as people are putting in their answers. I'll just give it another minute to settle down. As I say, our apologies again for the problems with email at the start of this, but yeah, what we've got, I think, is capability right at the top and responsibility. So yeah, those are the ones that I need to find some examples for you. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to move to the final section. Thank you so much for letting us know that. So the way of changing the organization, the way of trying to move forward is kind of summed up in our 5 keys to the Hassell inclusion way. So yeah, expand awareness was all about motivation. It seemed like people were doing fairly okay on that. Actually, both of the top things are in embed strategy, which is very much about, as an organization, how do we get things going well. So let's look at these, and as I say, please feel free to send through more questions as we go in the chat. That would be great. Howard, I'm glad you found the scorecard very, very helpful. I'm going to start talking about what you and Rebecca were asking about, which was capability assessments and training. So those are fundamental parts of how you can make sure that you get good at accessibility as an organization. A couple of examples. So we've been working with a huge organization. They're one of the largest banks in the world. They have teams of IT staff all over the world. And actually, it was they who we created our first capability tests for. So capability assessment is very much around the idea that if you ask a member of your staff, or if they're any good at accessibility, probably one of the first things that they will know about accessibility is that actually, if people get it wrong, the organization can be sued. Now, that's the sort of thing that makes people clam up and say, oh, of course I'm good at accessibility, because if you've asked, you want the answer to be yes, rather than no. So for years, we had to try and get beyond that, because what we were finding was if we drilled a little deeper, people really didn't know what they were doing with accessibility. So we created, initially, they were kind of surveys that took half an hour for people to fill in. They were all questions that weren't able to be cut and pasted from answers from the internet. So they were all, how would you go about doing this? How, if you were a developer, how would you create an accessible date picker or whatever, these sorts of things. It was all not necessarily just about the skills, but about the application of those skills. And what we found is over time, we've needed to do more and more and more of these things. So we now have kind of 10, 15-minute surveys that people can take, and we can get answers a lot more quickly. To be clear, we don't give any of these things away for free, mostly because, number one, we don't want them out there so that people know how to answer these things, because they are getting a little bit more multiple choice now. The second thing, though, is that there are so many wrong answers. People will, there are questions that we put in to catch people out. For example, and I'll give this one away to you at least. So when it comes to designers, we ask questions around what happens if the color contrast doesn't work for a website. And invariably, what we have is lots of designers who just don't know what to do at all, and lots of designers who just say, oh, well, we'll change all of the colors. And actually, neither of those answers is the right answer from our perspective, because it's all about brand, and it's all about balancing these things. People sometimes do accessibility well, and then they forget the rest of their job, or that they work in an organization that is actually trying to be consistent on not just accessibility, but all other aspects of the experience on their site. So yeah, that's the thing. As I say, we've been helping. We now test out, new accessibility experts who join their team, all go through our tests just to make sure, on behalf of the client, that they are who they say they are technically. So it's really, really important. And to the point around training, yes, there are huge numbers of ways of being trained in accessibility, most people do what Rebecca was talking about, which is just kind of pick up bits and bobs here, there, and everywhere. Actually, if you go onto our website, you can find an article by our developer trainer, Graham, where he's talking about ARIA, which is the way for developers to make custom widgets, so sliders, tab panels, all of those sorts of things that are there on most websites these days, accessible. And invariably, what that talks about is that where people have half the knowledge that they need, it can sometimes almost be worse than if they have no knowledge at all. So it's really trying to enable you to check, do the people who are working with you have the capability to do what they need to do in their job? Most people, when we do our surveys, one of the questions is, have you had accessibility training? And actually what we find is in a lot of time with a lot of our clients, people say, yes, I've had accessibility training, and then they don't know any of what accessibility requires from them as a job. And so that's the segue through to the other question, which was around responsibility. So a lot of the time in organizations, people will not know the responsibility. I'll give you one example. We had one client where we did a product manager training with them. And normally we have, about sort of 5 or 6 people in a large organization who are product managers. In this room, we had over 30, and they were all product managers for different parts of the website. And when it got to the part of the training where we asked them about responsibility, whose job is it to check things are good enough to go out in terms of quality assurance, they said, well, it's me. Every single person said me. And when I said, so what about accessibility? Do you check for that? They were all kind of slightly blank. Compare that to another organization we work with where they have the most rigorous governance process that I've ever seen, so that nothing goes live unless it's being checked within an inch of its life that it's accessible, or certainly that the organization knows if it's not accessible and they still need to put it out there, what they need to do to mitigate any risk in there. So just a couple of examples of the sorts of things. The really important stuff is have a chat with us. Our surveys, our capability surveys are not free, but they're also not expensive. The only thing that you pay for is our expertise in actually marking them and saying, okay, from what we've got from your staff, we think that these people are absolutely fine. These people need training, that sort of thing. So thank you. That's really good. I mean, really, that is the kind of the end of our session today. Your questions have been really good. I'm going to take another couple. So Hannah has been basing her plan on the scorecard. That's kind of what we wanted people to do because it's best practice. We have one organization that we're working with at the moment who I'm debugging a plan that they put together, and parts of the plan are really good and parts of the plan aren't helpful, and they're missing loads of things that are. So the scorecard can really enable you to say, this is the stuff that really matters. And it's not just us in our organization that say our plan should be this. This is actually following an international standard. Just one last question from Rebecca. Would you say it's more important to know what standards you're working to first and then upskill people to implement them? Yeah, absolutely. So it's massively important to know what standards you're working to. The way I would explain this, I think, would be that, say, for example, you're doing native mobile apps, then your developers need to know how to make those accessible. And that's with the Swift programming language for Apple or the Java programming language for Android. It's not HTML, JavaScript, CSS, all of those sorts of things that people who do web are. So yeah, if you don't know what level or what type of standards that you're looking at, then you're probably training people in the wrong thing. And again, there's a lot of people out there, because they're too scared to be honest about accessibility, they will say, oh, well, yes, I've been trained, but it's entirely possible that their training, for example, was on WCAG 2.0, but now most organizations, certainly all of PS Bar and the public sector, are now needing people to uphold WCAG 2.1, which has more than 10 more checkpoints in it, that if people don't even know they exist, they won't know how to kind of work with those. So yeah, it's really important to make sure that's there. This is from Magex. Are you aware of any good resources available for people running their own internal awareness training for employees and clients? Yeah, I mean, so we help lots of organizations run that. In terms of resources, the best thing that you could do really for awareness training is find somebody who has a disability who's able to talk about how digital is needed for them, and then get them to talk about it. So the best resources really are people with disabilities. As I say, we run what we term speed dating for a lot of organizations to help them sit down with people with different disabilities and understand how the world looks from that person's perspective. The combination of that and real technical experience is a really good thing. I wanted to say thank you very much. As I say, it was a little slow start. Our apologies again for any problems with you getting the link to this session, but I'm so glad you came and joined us. What we want you to kind of take from this is that, take anything that is going to work in your organization. You can get good at this. We're here to empower you, but we want you to, if you like, to be the solution in your organization. One of the things that you would have seen in Pete's section on support is don't get dependent on your accessibility suppliers, and that includes us as well as everybody. The thing that, if you like, makes us very different from most accessibility companies out there is that we want to train people more than anything, because there are so many people out there who need that training, that our success for us is our clients not needing us anymore. So with that in mind, there is another one of these sessions along next month in January. We're going to be looking at trends and opportunities for 2021 in accessibility. So this year has been a really challenging year for people to maintain accessibility as they've been racing towards getting digital in everything that they do. So many roadmaps have been sped up massively. And so we're really interested to share some of the things I think that have come out of that, and some of the things that we think are going to be really, really big in 2021. So we look forward to seeing as many of you there as possible. And I know Pete's put the Eventbrite link in the chat. Rob's asking, will this session be available as a recording? Yeah, at some point. We're still working out the best way of making that happen at the moment. So if there's something in particular that you need, then please let us know. You can let us know at contact@hasselinclusion.com. We've really appreciated your time in what is a very busy and hopefully very festive time of year for you. We just like to say, we really value your time. Hope that through the session today and also the scorecard itself, that you will be able to echo some of the comments that we've been getting from people saying that these things have been massively helpful for them and have helped them set their plans for next year. If there's anything we can do to help, contact us. We'd love to take you forwards with this. Otherwise, see you next month, and have a lovely Christmas and New Year. Thanks, everybody. Take care. Cheers. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone.